Howdy again everyone, and today I'm checking out something I've never seen before, especially designed for video makers, an autofocus anamorphic, the Sirui 40mm T1.8 1.33x anamorphic lens. It has a 1.33x projection ratio, stretching your image vertically so you can squidge it back down to keep better resolution for widescreen video work, as well as distinctive bokeh and flaring effects. This lens is designed for Sony E-mount mirrorless camera systems with APS-C sized sensors. Here's the coverage you get if you shoot with it on full frame. Impressively, it almost does cover a full frame sensor, so full frame shooters who are willing to crop just a little bit might be interested in this lens as well. On the APS-C cameras it's intended for though, that 40mm focal length offers a very slightly telephoto 60mm field of view, giving you a nice little emphasis on your subject, especially at T1.8, while not being so tight that the rest of your background is completely compressed away. That makes it potentially very useful for subject video work, and the nice bright maximum aperture of T1.8 means you can more effectively shoot in darker situations as well. The lens's price is only $800 or about £750 here in the UK, which seems like potentially really good value. I'd like to thank Sirui for sending me one of these lenses for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. The big difference in this lens is its autofocus, something you never really see on anamorphic lenses, but something incredibly useful. I found the lens's autofocus to be quiet and fairly accurate, but rather on the slow side. Subject tracking worked okay though. Here you can see that the lens is successfully focusing on my face, but it takes a little while to get there, so as long as you're not asking anything too strenuous of it, the autofocus system does work, slowly but surely. And for anyone interested, here is how the lens autofocuses when you've just got one person's face in the room to focus on. Now I'm going to move forward and back just a little bit so that you can see how quickly or well it's actually responding. My Sony a7R III camera is quite quick with facial recognition autofocus, even though it's an older model now, but it is possible that a newer camera will work just a little bit faster with this lens. I did find that when I was shooting at an aperture darker than T8, I experienced a lot of focus hunting, even in still scenes. However, my Sony a7R III is a slightly older model now, so you may get better results than this on a newer camera. So, while it does feel like a bit of a low-budget autofocus system, and it has to be at this price, you can still get good results if you use it properly. The lens's build quality is really tough and metallic, and it's rather a big lens, but actually not too heavy at 614 grams or under 1.5 pounds. The rear mount features a USB-C port for future firmware updates, as well as a weather sealing gasket, which is always encouraging to see. The rear aperture ring has metal grooves and can be set to turn smoothly for video work or with nice positive clicks in case you want to get things set in place a little more firmly. Then comes an auto manual focus switch and an autofocus lock button, which is slightly difficult to press down. Then we get the lens's focus ring. It too is made of metal and features the same deep grooves as the aperture ring. Unfortunately, it cannot be set to function in a linear style with the lens's focus motor, which is a disappointment nowadays, but it still works okay and quite responsively with a focus motor. The lens does suffer from some moderate focus breathing here, which is a bit of a shame for video makers at this focal length, but I have seen worse than that before. The lens does not come with a hood, but it does have a 77mm filter thread. Overall, as I mentioned, the build quality is pretty dead simple here, with helpful features for video makers who the lens is very obviously aimed at. Although it doesn't have its own image stabilization, you have to rely on your camera for that. And it's pretty awesome to have even just a basic autofocus system available when shooting anamorphic footage, even if it's on the slow side. Okay, well, let's see about image quality now. I'll be testing this thing on a 24MP APS-C camera, but bear in mind, 4K video footage is only about 8MP in resolution. No in-camera corrections are available with this lens. At T1.8, in the middle of the image, sharpness and contrast are just good, and we're getting a touch of red to the colours. Stop down to T2 for a touch more contrast, but it's at T2.8 that sharpness and contrast become very good, and at T4 that it becomes excellent, although we are catching still a touch of magenta colour fringing here. Okay, let's open that aperture back up to T1.8 and take a look at corner image quality. Okay, the corners are looking a little softer now, but contrast is still good. We also catch some rather strong colour fringing on contrasting edges here. The image looks about the same at T2, but at T2.8 we suddenly see very good sharpness and contrast in the image corners, although that pesky colour fringing is still there, and at T4 we get perfect sharpness from corner to corner. The lens stays this sharp down to T11. Overall, while this might not be the sharpest lens in the world at its brightest apertures, it's still more than enough resolution for 4K video work, and the contrast isn't too bad either. It's possible that you'll notice a little of that colour fringing in your image corners when shooting 4K, but it won't be too bad. Okay, let's take a look at distortion and vignetting now. The lens is projecting a moderate amount of barrel distortion here, but thankfully nothing too strong. The lens's almost full-frame image circle means that vignetting is almost non-existent here, even at T1.8. If you open the aperture to T2.8, you will see just a touch of extra brightness in those corners, so it's nice to see that at least you don't have to correct vignetting in your video footage. The lens's minimum focus distance is a slightly long 60 cm. Close-up image quality is noticeably softer than before at T1.8, although at T2.8 and T4 we get better sharpness and contrast. Next, work against bright light, and this lens is deliberately designed to give you strong horizontal flaring effects, which it happily does for you. There's even an option to get a version of this lens with blue flaring instead. That flaring does look real nice, although I don't appreciate the accompanying general drop in contrast when bright lights are in the frame. Next, bokeh. This lens can get you some very out of focus backgrounds here with a nice subtle elliptical shape to them, and I always found the softness of its bokeh to be pretty impressive actually. Nice. Finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. There's a touch of it visible at T1.8, stop down to T2.8 or T4 to see it gradually dissipate. Overall then, well, for the quite reasonable price that they're asking, Sirui have put together a fairly nice tool for those wanting to take their 4K video work to a more interesting place. It's not the sharpest lens in the universe, but it's more than good enough for 4K shooting, and its footage looks quite lovely overall, except for a bit of a red colour cast, which you can easily correct in editing. Its autofocus is quite slow and basic, which is something you do need to be aware of, but as long as you're shooting at wider apertures, it does get you there, and it works relatively reliably. Just don't expect it to keep up with shooting sports or action sequences. Keep things gentle or switch over to manual focus mode. But yeah, it's a unique lens at a reasonable price, which can get you some very nice footage. So if you are okay with its limitations, it does come recommended. Okay, that was fun and different. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone. My usual reminder, check out the playlists on my channel to find the right lens reviews for your camera system. And if you'd like to support the work I'm doing in producing these sponsorship-free videos, then check out my Patreon page, where supporters get all kinds of exclusive bonus content. Ciao for now, everyone.